The lost generation is the or generation which is the consequence of the war. All right, maybe I would say that our generation, what we see today, the contemporary generation, is also considered to be a lost generation. Okay, so this is a point as well. A lost generation is the generation which is the output of the war, literature, or maybe an output of how do I put it for you? An output of a kind of literature which was which proved to us, the typical late modern age period. What did we see in the late modern age period? We saw in the late modern age period that the public was disoriented, wandering, and directionless. All right, so it is lost. So they don't know what is it. They're feeling they're so haunted by what is it that is permanent. So if I have to pursue a job, if I have to pursue employment, if I have to pursue education, for what? When eventually my whole existence is not permanent. What is it that is permanent? Why should I strive for these strive for these petty happiness in this particular time? That's actually the breeding ground of existential literature. That's the point. While living in the trenches, conditions were deplorable. Disease was rife. Trench foot, in which soldiers suffered from gangrene. Gangrene is the infected toe of a person, where the toe of a person is actually chopped off, and fungus as a result of wet, muddy conditions. Trench fever, which included conjunctivitis, rashes, and headaches, and trench mouth, or acute necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis. So this is a gum disease which comes about because of time and again living in the trench. You understand what is a trench, right? You understand trench is a kind of a depressed platform that is created on the earth so that the soldiers are able to camouflage. All right. So at least 2 million deaths in the trenches resulted from disease before the Treaty of Versailles ended the war on 28 June 1919. See, many people died and their bodies were kept rotting in these trenches, which actually resulted in a kind of diseases for the other soldiers who were still fighting the war at that particular point. So the term was coined from something Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein was the one who wrote a very famous novel by name The Grapes of Wrath. All right. Witness the owner of a garage saying to his young employee, which Hemingway later uses as an epitaph to his novel, The Sun Also Rises, "You are all a lost generation." The after effect of wars are so deadening. There comes a point in Gertrude Stein's novel, especially The Grapes of Wrath, where there is this young boy. Okay, that's a picture. What you see, a young boy who is facing the aftermath of war, and then he has nothing to eat, and the protagonist, or one of those women, offers breast milk to this child, because he's after all left with nothing to eat. There's nothing available to eat, and the only way this person could survive was by drinking breast milk. So that is the atrocities of war that you see, consequential literature as a part of lost generation. Right. You also look at gender roles and importance. Right? When we looked at, there was a lot of chivalry which was being celebrated. Like, for example, you talked about the glamorous man, the chivalric man, the masculine man, suddenly was, falling a prey to his own vulnerabilities and his own weaknesses. All right. So, it happens in one of in the novel, for example, in The Sun Also Rises, it so happens that this person is wounded because of the consequence of war. And then, this, and it is his female love, that is Brett, who acts as the man. There's a reversal of roles where the women takes to becoming the man, and then, manipulating sexual partners and taking charge of their life. So it so happens that this man grows important because of the consequence of war, and the women takes the upper hand, in their sexual matters, or, in their familial life. And that is what is being portrayed. Same here. A very famous poem that you understand by Eliot is The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And Prufrock's inability to declare his love is also because of the vulnerabilities of the man. See, time and again, we might have seen in literature about the chivalric man, the man who pursues the women in order to express love. But here we're seeing the vulnerable man who is afflicted because of the war, and then, is suddenly prone to not be a victim of his masculinity. All right. So at that particular juncture, you see, gender roles reversed, because, you generally saw that the man was the tough masculine stature is melting with this lost generation. When we talk of T.S. Eliot, under this backdrop one lost generation, the poem which is like the epitome of the lost generation is The Wasteland. The Wasteland was our England. What was Wasteland? That is a wasteland which has been destroyed because of war. Like exactly how you use bulldozers. Those bulldozers have actually scrapped off the buildings. It's like the consequence of war. And at that particular point, you also see wasteland as, a point of moral degeneration. All right. That's a point. Maybe, we have so culturally because we don't know, we're so directionless in life. All right. So, we've become so, so mechanized in life. So that is the symbol of wasteland. An absolute cultural degeneration is something what you see in the wasteland for that matter. You also see in wasteland at this particular point, I'm just forgetting at a moment, right? You also see at this particular point that there comes a point in, as much as he talks about cultural degeneration, there comes a point, I guess in one of the third components, if I'm not wrong, third components of the wasteland, where some of the women are gathered at a bar, and the bartender is telling those women that it's already time. Hurry up, please, it is time. Indicating that it is time for the bar to close. Look at the women. What kind of a moral degeneration have we come down to? Women are staying up in the bar late into the night to such an extent that the bartender has to remind the women that it's actually time for him to shut the bar. So maybe you talk about, today, if you're going to look at, wasteland, we might find that as Eliot has been extremely maybe misogynist in his ways, but then that apart, it generally showed to us, maybe you could say an evaporation of boundaries which separated the moralities of men and women. See, people, the kind of literature which existed was actually a moralistic literature. Through Eliot's writing, we see that we see this moral aspect being degenerated. That's why when Eliot ends the poem, he ends with this one statement, that is, who shall set my lands in order? So finally, this kind of a moral degeneration has come about to be. Now, who is going to be the person who's going to set these lands in order? Who is going to be that one person who's going to bring back the kind of grand, patriotic, nationalistic England which existed once upon a time? And then, that pining is with which it ends. And you understand that this is such a raw portrayal of England at that particular point, that it ends with this one very specific statement, Om Shanti, 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 Shanti. Let peace befall upon this kind of toll that literature and age has taken because of the atrocities of war, and especially because of the atrocities of war. Okay, and right, it was also because, and you understand that, because of war, it was not just the soldiers who were traumatized, right? The problem also rests with the fact that even the common people were also traumatized because of war. That's why they call it as a total war. It's not that the people who die or only the soldiers. Like when you see the deaths because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or let's say you talk about the deaths because of the World War, it's not just because that, you see that only the soldiers die. It's also the common people who die. And that's all the more pathetic. And, you see suddenly how power can be disruptive. All right, this is a symbol that we are, looking at. Today, we understand, today, even in let's say, an institutional setup, when we look at a power, let's say we look at a management, the management has a lot of power. Loads of power can be destructive. Exactly like that is what happened with England. It had a lot of power in its hands, and ultimately, what did that power lead to? A lot of destruction eventually. So as communities try to recover after the war, civilians and soldiers looked around at the destruction of the countries and at the places once occupied by friends and family. You see this kind of a description also. You see this in Sylvia Plath's Daddy. Okay, so though you don't see Sylvia Plath's Daddy as more of a war literature, but you also see there exactly like how her father might have originated from Poland. Poland is an area that has been actually annexed by Germany. So, the entirety of Poland, the roots of Poland has been completely destroyed because of 3 wars. All right. So that gory picture, like you don't even know what you were a part of. Suddenly you felt you left isolated in this particular world. All right. And then, you saw the amount of atrocities that has been portrayed. So maybe you can say this is like documenting the horrific consequences of war. So you see this in popular literature. This is like an emerging area of research. Like I said, recently the movie Major is also giving us a picture of how is this person, Major Unni Krishnan died fighting with the terrorists in 2611, or let's say like I said about Major Captain Vikram Batra, or let's say you talk about Sardar Udham Singh, or let's say he was maybe a revolutionary for that matter. You also see about this in one more kind of a literature, and I just forgot about it. Another consequential literature of this transition is, all right, you also see this in Train to Pakistan by Kushwant Singh. So all these literatures have become very, very common that we are reading. Today, I told you against the backdrop of war literature, you can still look at Afghanistan before the Taliban and after the Taliban. You can look at the Ukraine and the Russian literature and how war has impacted and what is the consequence of war in the society of Ukraine and let's say Russia for that matter. So all these are maybe say a coming of modern literature as well. Okay, today one can actually take up a topic on war literature for the purpose of research. Today. There is one more point. Just give me a moment. I had scribbled it. All right, right. You also see at this particular point, like I have observed that how most of these writers have used nature as a regenerating force. Like I said, how even, Eliot uses the force of nature in order to calm down the moral degeneration which has come about because of war. So people look at nature as the force which might, take a person out of the alarming bells of war and somehow rejuvenate and replenish in him the individualistic sense which has been lost because of the horrors of war. All right, that is the lost generation that we have been talking about. And then, yes, we are here specifically, we are looking at lost generation with the two meaning. One is especially the writers, the post-war kind of a generation. We are all a consequence of the post-war generation. Like, for us, war might have been the partition. For us, the war might have been the world wars. All right, so we are all a post-war generation. So, and again, this is kind of a generation which has lost its culture. Right, like for example, imagine the many people who might have been a part of Lahore and who have been a part of Karachi, and then they have moved and settled into Punjab today. Or let's say people who were a part of Bangladesh and then maybe have moved to Bengal and settled today. So all these people, who have lost the culture because of war and their childhood suddenly feels so irrelevant at that particular point. You might have even observed this, let's say, in the movie, Bhag Milkha Bhag. Okay, for example, you understand Milkha does not want to go back to Pakistan for a run or for a race in athletics because that past haunts him. Suddenly your childhood becomes so haunting, all because of the aftermath of war. So that is what you're looking at. This is a very right example if one has to understand it in the present day context. So the kind of writers that we have spoken about is Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Dos Passos, Steinbeck, or Faulkner. Okay. You also understand under this pretext is what you understand the coming up of even who was Huxley's Brave New World is also an output of this war as well. I've spoken to you about Wasteland, which actually showed us the disillusionment of Europe. The post-war scenario is what it has been shown. It has shown us, and also we understand the severe purposelessness which has come about as a consequence of war. This is like the birth of existentialist and absurdist writings, where there is no direction, man is isolated, there is no governing force, all that, there is impermanence, there is uncertainty, there is an immaterial understanding of the world. All these where you feel suddenly alone in this warfare, in this battlefield that you're a part of, that originates in their writings. This is the reason why the lost generation also bred a lot of philosophies, especially, let's say, you might understand, Kierkegaard being one thing, Sartre one, and then you understand of who was the other person, Kafka. All these philosophies birthed as a consequence of the lost generation, where they're trying to make sense of the nonsensical. Okay, the world, you're already a part of a nonsensical world. It no longer makes sense. When everything was going to be erased one day, what sense are you going to draw out of this? That's the birthing point of many of these existential and philosophies which became a part of 20th century literary movements. Okay. Right. And, they've lost faith, very obvious, in any social political and religious institutions. You're very, very aware of it. Like, suddenly, you are not, you a kind of social setup, your social setup, the kind of neighbors that you were a part of, that is lost. The kind of a political framework that you were a part of, that's lost. So all their belief in all these institutions were suddenly lost at this particular point. And then, this was, you are, this is a term what you give towards the pioneers of modernism. This may be consequence of modernism, pioneers of modernism. Like I said, it is a concept, gives about existential and psychological leftovers of the Great War.